On to the players suffering with the other pattern, the excessive hook or overdraw pattern. So for a right-handed golfer, that ball moving excessively from right to left. So we've already shown the video in terms of the ball flight laws, what would need to happen at impact between the face direction and the club head travel to create that pattern. I would need that club head to be traveling further to the right as a right-handed golfer than the face is aiming at impact. And if I have those two data parameters excessively wide apart, so that path traveling excessively right, the face aiming a little bit left of target, I'm going to get that overdraw, that overhook pattern. So again, really looking at the two influences as you see, again, going back to face at impact and club head path at impact, them being the two main influences of creating either pattern really, but in this case, talking about a hook. Now, what's very important before we get into the causes and the solutions that we might remedy or recommend, for players suffering from these, it's very important that we're talking specifically about the players suffering from that excessive shot. Okay, so we might talk about things that you might already have in your golf swing, but your ball flight is absolutely fine. For example, that face maybe being a little bit closed in backswing, but you adapt really well for many other reasons. So everything we mentioned in this section of the course is really focused or pointed at or helpful for players suffering from an excessive draw or overhook pattern. That's very, very important to note before we go into the causes. So again, in this next video, we're going to talk about the very, very first cause, and that would be face. And we're going to create a little bit of an assessment tool for you to check your own face orientation in your backswing right now, if it is a case where you're suffering from that excessive draw or overhook pattern. So let's just start with an assessment, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at the face position or orientation through your golf swing. So let's get set up, and we just have a mid-iron here, and as we work back to this first kind of P2 position, shaft parallel, where might we like to see that golf club? A little bit more here, okay? So we'd like to see that kind of toe that golf club diagonally pointing up towards where my hat is. Where might we see it for those players suffering from an excessive hook pattern? If the club face is the issue, we might see that face more pointed down towards the ground. Now, as we work back further into that backswing, might we see that same position? Yes, we would. We'd see continuation of that face again, pointing more towards the sky, as opposed to a more neutral position, somewhere similar to this. Now, it's very important when we're looking at players that have that hook pattern because of face orientation. Generally speaking, we see that happen very early in the backswing. It's quite uncommon to see a very square club face position early, so that club travels back very neutral and then starts getting closed late on. It can happen, but generally speaking, we see it in the first move. So really that first position, that shaft parallel position, is a nice reference point to have if you are suffering from that overdraw, that hook pattern. So again, just working it back, what really might we see from that player that has that club excessively closed? We would see that club face pointing down to the ground. What might we like to see from that player to remedy that position would be the face pointing a little bit more diagonally, so nearly parallel to my spine angle here. So if I was standing straight up, that club would be parallel here. If I'm tilted over, parallel there. That's generally speaking the position we'd like to see. And then as we work up top, similar position in terms of that. And then as we work down, again, a similar position to where it was on the way back. So the first real guide, the first real kind of checkpoint is the assessment of the face throughout your backswing. Check that first. Now, if you do see an issue there, if you see that club face getting excessively closed, what are some drills or some actual tasks you could do to remedy that? Now, the first one would be fairly simple. What we would do is we'd get set up, get a mid-iron in hand, work our way back. Now, the little trick with this is I want you to keep your eye on the golf ball. So as you work back, stop at that position first, keeping eye on golf ball. Now from here, rotate your head back, have a look, and then remedy the golf club, okay? We're gonna go back to the start and do that again. So again, very importantly, when I'm doing it in these first two kind of rehearsals, I'm keeping my eye on the golf ball, okay? I'm gonna look back, and then I'm gonna try and remedy it. Now in this next one, this third one, as I go, I'm gonna keep my eye on the golf ball again, and now I'm gonna try and feel that new position myself, have a little look back and go, okay, that's all right. And then from there, just a little chip through. So that would be the first assessment. And again, what you'll notice is I'm not looking back the first time. Again, the challenge with golf is we need the feel and we need the visual confirmation to help us learn new things. But I'm going to be looking at the golf ball throughout my swing. So the more I can get the feeling of this different move, the better for me. So as I work back, that nice idea, as I go back, keeping my eye on the golf ball, okay, that's the feeling here. What might I want there? Looking back to the golf ball, try and create that feeling again. Okay, for me, it feels like there's more kind of cup in my left wrist. For me, it feels like my forearm's more turned, whatever the case may be, just creating that nice issue or nice kind of, kind of really reference point as you do this. So again, the very first thing is to assess. Once we get nice assessment, our first drill is really just looking at that early point. As I said, very seldom we get players really good here and then start to close it later on. It does happen, but seldom. More often than not, it's early that club face is shutting down or getting a little bit closed. So that's what we go to for the very first drill. So let's look at another possible cause that club face gets excessively closed early in the first move. And what we're going to look at is how the body turns and moves with the club head. Now we talked about the slicing player, we talked about more a lack of body rotation. Here we're going to look at the opposite. We'll be looking at those players as they get set up. Their very first move is to actually start turning excessively with the hips and the pelvis, nearly falling back on themselves. When that happens, we get this handle dragged in low around behind us, and again, that can create a little bit of that club face closed position. So when we're looking at those players, the issue or the creation or the cause even of that early club face closed position might be excessive rotation early, okay, or even reorientation, and that creates this handle drag where then the club face gets a little bit closed. So it might look something like this, where I go and I turn here, and again, you can kind of see that low left position in terms of what happens. So what might we look for in those players? And again, really looking at, well, what's the influence? It's the idea or the perception that I have to turn and rotate a lot. Now, there could be physical issues in there in terms of constraints and restrictions. Obviously, we want to kind of very much carefully work around those. But if we were to look for a different position, what we might like to see then as we go back is the feeling as we go back of the hands nearly reaching up a little bit out away from us. So that sensation as we go back, the hands nearly moving up and a little bit out. And what that'll do is as I move my hands up and out, it'll actually hold my lower half in place a little bit more. So the idea or the kind of feeling, a sensation, as instead of that early turn and pivoting backwards and nearly falling on top of my left side, as I go back, the feeling of the hands moving up and a little bit out actually holds this whole pelvis, this hip rotation in place. And then from there, once I get in that position, now I can start to turn and allow that rotation that I want. So again, that nice idea as I work back, hands up and out as more of a sensation. And you can try in a little swing, hands up and out, and just make sure it kind of feels like it's holding that lower half a little bit, allowing that club face to actually start to rotate into a square position, as opposed to, again, falling back on that left side. So when we're looking at a possible cause of that early face closing position, it is an excessive early rotation. The perception or belief I have to turn as much as I possibly can early to create more speed, distance, accuracy, whatever the case may be, actually causes that club face to get handle dragged and get closed early. So again, something to be aware of if that matches what you might be doing. So the big influence obviously on face is going to be grip. And when we're talking about an excessive hook or overdraw pattern, again, we got to look at the grip like we did with the slice pattern. So let's look at the lead hand first. So again, right-handed golfer, lead hand is the left hand. Left-handed golfer, lead hand would be your right hand, basically the hand closest to the target. So what might that lead hand look like if it is the cause of an excessively closed club face throughout your golf swing at impact? So if we're looking at the setup position and we get that lead hand on the golf club, what might neutral be like? Let's set up there and we kind of go, okay, for a neutral position, I might see these reference points, this little kind of line between thumb and hand pointing in between chin and right shoulder. I could also use maybe 2.5 knuckles being seen on the club. Again, as I talked about, I like to use the idea of that little snuff box in here, that little joint, that little depression at the top of your hand, just being slightly to the right of handle. That would be more neutral lead hand position. So when we see those players maybe suffering from an excessive hook or overdraw pattern, and the grip is the cause of the closing of the face, or the grip really closing the face at impact, excuse me, that hand might look a little bit more something like this, where we then see that little snuff box area very much nearly half an inch or an inch to the right of the handle, a lot of knuckles on the left hand, this line here pointing outside the trail shoulder. So I put my club down in that position, despite it being square at the moment. As that club works back to impact, that hand, that forearm wanting to rotate to back where it feels neutral, and then you can see that closing mechanism happening through impact. So that would be that lead hand position. So again, being very, very careful. Other kind of references or other kind of things you might see if that lead hand is excessively strong might be that lead shoulder excessively high, protracted, pushed up. You might see that handle excessively far forward. So players with that lead hand excessively strong, rotated away from target, you'll see the handle forward, maybe that lead shoulder a little bit high too. In terms of that setup position, might look something similar to this. So when you're looking at that, again, grips being very influential, tricky to change, but if it is the cause, if that's why you're hitting those hook patterns, very, very importantly, we start there, we change that. That's the very first, the nucleus of the influence. Everything else, if we leave that grip there and that's the cause, we have to then adapt with our bodies around that. So again, just running through that, what might we like to see in more neutral position? We would see again that line going kind of between chin and shoulder, between thumb and kind of rest of the hand, maybe 2.5 knuckles in terms of looking down. And again, that little depression, that little snuff box area at the top of your hand there, just slightly to the right as I'm looking of the handle. That excessively strong grip, we would see that more rotated around there, the forearm turning, the lower part of the forearm, the shoulder getting high, the hands pushing forward, and then from there again, as I work down, that excessively closed club face impact, creating that overdraw or that hook pattern. So that would be the lead hand influence. When we're looking at the trail hand influence, the trail hand very much kind of can work off what the lead hand does. So it will be influenced somewhat by each other. But if we were looking at a good lead hand and an excessively strong trail hand, if the strong trail hand was the issue, where might we see it? So as we put those hands on the golf club, as I put that trail hand on the golf club in a more neutral position, we see again that little kind of V form between thumb and the rest of the hand, pointing between chin and trail shoulder as a little reference. In terms of knuckles, I only really see about one knuckle in terms of on my trail hand, but again, that little snuff box area that we have there, just slightly off to the right hand side of the grip. If that trail hand gets excessively strong, we see it move from more underneath the handle. Very, very seldom will I actually see any knuckles if it's excessively strong. And again, as I would look down, that little snuff box area very much nearly 2.5, 3 inches off the handle right now. So kind of good lead hand, strong trail hand would look something like this. And again, as that trail hand gets stronger and stronger, that right elbow or that right shoulder is going to get lower and lower. You're going to see this position here. And again, as that trail hand comes in, it's going to want to rotate back to where it feels comfortable, which would be the closing mechanism of that face. With the trail hand, the other little thing that we got to be careful of is the very first move as you go into backswing. When the trail hand gets underneath like that at setup in a very strong position, the way it wants to move back, it wants to nearly hinge back on itself. And if you're looking at what the club face does as I do that, that club face starts to close very, very early. And again, going back to what we talked about at the very start of this kind of overly draw, over hook pattern player video, we said, right, it's nearly that early move is really the closer of the club face. Okay, so again, talking about club face here is kind of more the cause or the issue. So again, which you're looking at the grip, lead hand, excessively strong, trail hand, excessively strong. Have a look on your grip, assess where you are in terms of those kind of platforms or those spectrums, excuse me, and then start exploring and go, okay, well, I wonder if I made this grip, this right hand a little bit weaker, put it more on top, would that change the ball flight? And definitely explore all these things. But if we're looking at kind of grip, we're looking at face, that's what we look at in the lead hand, that's what we look at in the trail hand, how they would influence or create more of that overdraw or hook pattern.